Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I first like to thank the Ad Club Board for putting together this event and bringing together this community of professionals to share. Today, you're going to have a lively conversation. You're going to hear from some folks who are very, very passionate about a very, very serious space. But before we jump into the panel, we're actually going to bring up Chris Morton. Chris Morton is the president of Havas Life Metro. Chris comes to us with a lot of experience. He has over 20 years of experience in healthcare marketing and advertising. And having that much experience, he's been able to see the evolution of the industry and the innovation. It has been instrumental in leading his clients. So we're going to have Chris come up and we're going to have a short chat. Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Happy to have you. So Chris, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing at Havas Life Metro.
Well, as Sakima said, I've been in the business probably longer than I care to admit. But it's been exciting and it's been a great evolution. And I think, in the healthcare space and what a lot of my agencies are focusing on right now is, again, watching the evolution of pharma, watching new therapeutic modalities, new therapeutic treatments come to market. I think we're always trying to find unique and disruptive ways to tell a compelling story about the brands that we support. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about regulation and how that impacts all of us in the pharma industry. I think what's been really great in the 20 plus years I've been doing this is watching sort of the expansion of channel in terms of how we can reach our audiences effectively in a meaningful way. When I first started, a lot of what we did, if you guys are familiar with the industry at all, was through direct personal selling. Companies had large, sales forces. They still do. But what is really great and what I think inspires me, and I think all the people on my teams the most, is just the robust mix of channel and opportunity that we have at our disposal to actually market like most, consumer packaged goods people market. And, we will talk, I think, a little bit later about whether or not we're kind of slow on the adoption curve. And I can give you my 2 cents on that. The panel's going to do a really good job from the sort of like manufacturer perspective. But I think, really understanding audiences in a meaningful way and understanding that it's beyond the science and the clinical aspects of medicine that really, allow us to tell compelling stories about brands.
Great. And Chris Magel actually initially spoke to the regulation that we face in this industry, right? And so the marketing landscape for pharma is quite different. Can you speak to the complexities of the ecosystem?
Sure. Do we have all day?
Couple of bullets.
Sure. So I think, the first thing is, it's interesting because a lot of what we do in pharma is focused on an important but sort of intermediary decision maker, being the healthcare professional, the physician, not necessarily always the end user, which is the patient. I think that's changing and evolving, and I think that's one of the things that's truly exciting about the industry is the sort of centricity around patient, their caregivers, and everything that sort of surrounds their care. Regulation, it's tough. It's a challenge that we face every day, but I think what inspires me and what motivates me to do this for as long as I have are the people that I work with every day that find ways to be creative in a highly regulated environment. And creativity isn't necessarily just being audacious in message. It's looking for a new and interesting way to reach an audience that's never been reached before. It's, thinking about ways to get, physician communities or patient communities better connected. It's not always about, for those of you who aren't in the industry might not know what I'm about to say, it's not always about the amount of fair balance, which is, for those of you who don't know the industry, it's all that small type that comes with, the one, short headline you're actually allowed to use. It's about being creative in different ways and challenging yourself as a team in conjunction with your clients to be, always looking for ways to innovate in a highly regulated space.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that we talked about when we first started planning for this event was your perspective on how pharma can look to other industries.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think we do that a lot by virtue of the fact that, I think people have the sort of assumption we're a little slow to adopt, and that may be true. I think the awareness curve is not slow. I think we're all keenly aware of what's going on in terms of new marketing sort of methodology and different sort of tools we can harness to reach our customers and tell compelling stories. So I do think that we very much look to our other industries, our other sort of brother and sister industries, if you will, to find ways to do things that are sort of unique and different and exciting. And I think, as a team of advertising professionals in the healthcare and wellness space, you have to keep your eyes and ears wide open to what's going on. Otherwise, you lose value in the face of your clients. So we spend a lot of time, I know, at Havas in particular, bringing in outside industries to sort of like tell us what they're doing, the challenges they're facing, the successes they're having. And that's been super helpful because I think it really sort of spurs new thinking, wherever possible. And I think the more that you do that, the more that you sort of like build a culture of learning and immersion into other sort of best practices, I think the better sort of solutions for your clients and your brands you can come forth with. So.
Great. One of the things you just mentioned, and we all talk about it in the pharma industry, is how we are late adopters.
Late
right?
adopters.
We're slow followers.
I won't be offended.
I've actually been very impressed by the innovation we've seen in our industry that maybe isn't seen, in the marketing message, but there is a ton of innovation. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to how you work with your partners and your clients to create that culture and bring that to bear safely?
Yeah. So I think, even though we're in a highly regulated, somewhat conservative market, there's a reason for that, right? I mean, we're talking about, in many cases, ethical pharmaceutical products that, are meant to sort of treat patients with somewhat, on the spectrum of severity of disease. And as we all know, they all have, sort of risk-benefit profiles we've got to consider. I think, good client and agency teams in this industry succeed and thrive when they come together and sort of align on sort of overarching goals and objectives as a team, not necessarily just for the brand, meaning that, we need to come together and almost charter that we will look for new and emerging technologies to tell our, to sort of communicate our message. We want to be better storytellers. And I think, oftentimes it's all about, okay, these are the core points of differentiation for this product or this brand. I think it's always most useful, most productive, and most successful when you align as a team, and that is all the multidisciplinary partners in really sort of seeking out and chartering like what good is going to look like. And I think, we want to be disruptive too. We want to do cool things, but not disruptive for disruptive sake. I think the industry often has a wait and see attitude when it comes to emerging technologies and trying new things. It's like, well, we'll let somebody else try this first and see how it goes. Because frankly, there can be sort of negative ramifications if you stick your neck out a little bit too far. But I think if you're doing it for a meaningful purpose and you're doing it for the benefit of the patient, I think you gotta push and try and be as creative and sort of innovative in a very, very crowded market as possible.
Yeah.
5.3 billion, I think Chris said. It is a huge market, and it's exciting. It's dynamic. All of my colleagues on the panel that you'll talk to in a few minutes certainly know there's a lot at stake, but we all want to be really good marketers, and we all want to do really great work.
Yeah, and I think the balance of that inter and intra organization mix is really important. And when you try to figure out all of the things that you can do, all the ways that you can innovate, there's a ton of, the term I think is new media, right? Yep. And I don't really know what is new media because I feel like everything's been around for so long and just continues to bring itself to bear again. But can you speak to us about how you help your clients balance what you should be trying and thinking about versus what is tried and true?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to what I said at first, I think what the exciting thing in our industry has been is sort of the plethora and sort of proliferation of different channels and ways to reach our core sort of constituency, in addition to audiences that we've not had to think about before. I mean, for those of you, who have health insurance know that managed care is big. We've seen the rise of allied health professionals. I think it's looking at identification of channels that are going to make a difference, that allow you to tell a story about your brand that's compelling and changes behavior. I mean, these are sort of fundamental marketing 101, 201 concepts and principles, but it's important as we in pharma sort of have the opportunity to expand our purview and look for different channels. So I think it's again going back to aligning on what shared goals and objectives are, and making sure that the appropriate amount of risk is sort of factored into that discussion, and making smart and informed choices. I don't think I've ever worked for a client who didn't put the patient first, who didn't put the need and the necessity to tell a story about a brand that can truly change people's lives first. Sure, we all want to do cool stuff and say, oh, I was the first person at X company to do a social media campaign, but did it matter? Did it make a difference? Did it move the needle for the brand? Did it change behavior? Did it open people's minds to sort of different thinking? So I think again, it's about let's do cool stuff. No one wants to create advertising that sucks. That's why you guys are all part of this club. But it has to be purposeful.
Yeah, definitely. We're gonna switch hats a little bit.
Okay.
And take a political perspective, if you will. Just for a quick moment, I promise.
This might be the end of my career.
It is relevant.
Hit me.
I promise it's relevant. I
Yes.
actually was impacted in my drive here this morning because I had to go around the Trump blockade. And so I was impacted.
Was that a physical or a metaphorical blockade?
No comment. So the question is, the president
Yes.
has been very vocal on his plans to deregulate to some degree the FDA. Can you share your thoughts on the impact, if any, it will have from a marketing perspective?
Well, I guess here's an opinion, and maybe not super informed. It's not fake news, but it'll be my I think FDA regulations have stacked up over time, and I think as an industry, and I don't want to speak to for my three colleagues who sort of look at this from a manufacturing perspective, I think looking at regulation from an FDA perspective is important, because I think one of the things that's frustrating to all of us is the amount of subjectivity and variability that goes into reviewing whether it's a new product that you're trying to bring to market, or it's an advertising program that you're trying to get vetted through the FDA. I don't know what the new administration plans to do, or what they mean, or how much that will filter down to us. I don't really think that the administration, when they talk about looking at regulation, are really too terribly concerned about warnings on advertising. I think they're probably more concerned about the speed in which products may be brought to market, and sort of bringing hurdles down. I don't know if that's the right thing to do. I mean, I've worked in this industry for a long time with scientists and physicians my whole career, and I do think that an appropriate vetting process is important. It's extremely expensive. I think it can get much more efficient. I also think from just a communication perspective, there is a need to sort of be a little bit more thoughtful about allowing pharma to communicate more clearly the benefits of the brands that they bring to market. There do need to be appropriate warnings. There does need to be appropriate balance. There's no question about that. But I think, and maybe you can ask these guys the same question, I think from an advertising person's point of view, the subjectivity of that can be extremely frustrating and counterproductive and seemingly nonsensical sometimes. But again, that's where the creativity comes in, right? That's where you work very closely in partnership with your clients to come up with solutions that allow you to, promote your brand in a meaningful way, and also be mindful of the safety and other components of the brand sort of like story that are also important.
Thank you for that.
Was that
no, that was
safe?
It was a very honest and
Okay.
authentic answer, and I think you brought up a lot of key points around how it will advance the pipeline, but not necessarily have an immediate impact on our marketing initiatives. I have you for just a short time more, and I'm going to wrap up with this last question.
Okay.
It is a standard question you ask on any panel.
Okay.
And it's the big what's next. Where do you see the biggest opportunity in the next few years?
Before we started, we had a little video shoot downstairs, and I had a similar question. I think we could honestly sit here and talk for a long, long time about that. But for me, there are a few things I think from a what's next perspective that's exciting. I think the emergence of big data and how data impacts our advertising programs in this space is as important as it is in consumer packaged goods and anything else. I definitely think that I mentioned before the centricity around patient, the rise of the patient, the empowerment of patient throughout sort of like the sort of therapeutic spectrum, whether you're talking about hypertension or advanced stage oncology drugs. I think patients, their caregivers, the voice they have is increasingly important, and our ability to authentically reach them is tantamount to our success in this industry. I think we need to look beyond and basic sort of scientific and clinical sort of tenets of how we promote brands and think about emotional, behavioral, and increasingly important cultural sort of components of advertising and how it impacts healthcare. I think, not to go back to the political sort of thing, but the Affordable Care Act and sort of like the unknown around that will certainly have an impact on our industry. I think, the rise of allied health professionals, I think, and so for those of you who don't know what I mean by that, but like somewhere between sort of like, the receptionist and the physician, there's a rise of nurse practitioners, physician's assistants. These people are becoming increasingly important and increasing gatekeepers to information. And then of course, just new media, digital innovation, social, like all of this stuff is constantly swirling. Yeah, it's a great time to be in the industry. It's super exciting. I think back sometimes to some of the things I was doing when I was starting my career, and it's mind-blowing to me that I feel like we're like the real deal now. Like we have access to amazing media. We have a really good dialogue going with patients for the first time. We're using social media and different channels to sort of have meaningful conversations. So it's exciting. It's really great. I think, Havas, just speaking for Havas, we've really kind of gone out and tried to invest in looking at some of these sort of what's next partnerships in data, cultural marketing, things like that. And it's great to still feel like I can learn new things and that my teams can learn new things and get excited about coming to work and make a difference.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the time.
Absolutely.
Can you please join me in giving a round of applause for
Thanks.
Chris?